Given up at birth, beaten and starved by adoptive parents, Marianne Curtis's life was tough, to say the least. Eventually, though, a school project would give her an outlet for the pain. Curtis wrote her memoir called Finding Gloria. Now, that book and her pure grit have helped her rise above her difficult upbringing to become a writer for the Dawson Trail Dispatch and now an author. Marianne lives in Ile-des-Chênes, but has joined me this morning in the studio. Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning.
And thank you for coming in early this morning to join me live in the studio. It's always nice to speak to an author live, face to face.
It's my pleasure being here.
So, I did mention it in the intro, and that is kind of the starting point and a lot of the meat in this book. You were adopted at birth, and you did deal with abuse. What type of abuse did you endure in your adoptive home?
Well, at first, there was a lot of emotional abuse. The physical abuse started when I was about 7, 8 years old. But before that, it was kind of things I didn't understand. But it was all very complicated on how the situation was at the time.
Mm-hmm. And we all know that we grew up thinking whatever our youth is and what we're experiencing in our household is just how everybody lives their life. So when did you, or tell me about the moment that you recognized that this was not normal?
Actually, I got to thinking about that the other day, and it was actually in junior high. That's when we were finally able to start leaving the school grounds and go elsewhere for our lunch breaks. And I had some girls at school that were always kind to me, and because I used to come to school without lunches and stuff like that, they felt sorry for me, so they would take me home to meet their family, and I would have lunch, and then I would watch how they'd interact. And Steinbach's a very Christian community, so there's a lot of really loving families in the area. So I got to watch that, and I was like, well, okay, my family does not work like this. So, and it kind of went from there, and I started questioning things.
Mm-hmm. Now you can understand how maybe living in that household that you were in, and I understand you were slightly sheltered from the public. You'd mentioned to me that you were basically hidden from the public. How was that possible?
Well, it's kind of funny. We had an 80-acre farm, and whenever anybody would come to the farm, my mom would be telling me either go to my room or go hide in the barn or in the hay shed or something like that. And I'm actually 10, 15 years after I moved out of home, there was people coming to me. I'm like, oh, I know who you are. And they're like, well, who are you? And I'd tell them, and they're like, well, we didn't know they had a third child. They knew I had a sister and a brother, but, it was just my mother's way of being protective of me.
Did she ever tell you why she was asking you to hide like that?
Yes and no. When I was much older, she confided me some of her childhood, and it was pretty horrific from what I understood. And I think that was her way of protecting me from experiencing the same thing she did, because she was sexually molested, and she was very, very protective of me. She tried to keep anything like that from happening.
Okay. Now, you eventually did leave the home. Tell me about that day that you finally ran away for good.
Well, I was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. She had me by the hair, and she was banging my head into a kitchen cabinet. And before I started blacking out, I just flung my arm and I hit her, and she dropped everything, including me. And I booked it to my bedroom, and I knew that I had to get out of there. And if I got caught, she would kill me, or at least that's the way it was in my head. I don't think she'd actually have killed me. However, that is how I felt. And I just packed a few things in a pillowcase and pretty much crawled all the way to Steinbach, 3 miles in a ditch.
And where did you go in Steinbach?
I ended up on the doorstep of a classmate who I knew from school, and her family took me in for a week and kept me there and basically hid me until CFS and the RCMP figured out what to do with me.
Now, I guess we need to make this clear as well, because it's a very important point. Was this a good friend of yours that you went to in Steinbach?
I hardly knew her. It was just somebody. She was a classmate. And, I kind of gravitated to the people. I was bullied really badly in school, so I kind of gravitated to the kids that were a little bit kinder to me. And sometimes they kind of thought of me as a puppy following them around and got annoying. But, maybe now they'll understand why I was that way.
Yeah. Now, you did leave the abusive home, and you can imagine there are lasting effects from being treated like that. How did this affect your life after you left?
There's actually quite a few instances. I learned to fear everything. I feared my abilities, very insecure, very I didn't trust my own choices. And, something as simple as, eating right now. Like I can honestly say I still have an eating disorder because I got so used most people eat when they're depressed. But because I was punished, my mom would put me 3 to 7 days without food for something she perceived I did wrong. I now, if my life is going really bad and I'm hating myself, I choose, like, it's not even a choice. It just automatically, I'm starving myself. And it's actually my family that keeps an eye on me. And they still, but now that I'm aware of it, I can actually control it better. And it's mind over matter.
And how has it affected your relationships with? I mean, you have children of your own.
I have 4, yes.
And how does it affect your relationships with your children or partners and that type of thing?
Well, initially, actually, as a parent, I was frightened. I had nothing to go on, and I had no one to fall back on because I pretty much, once I isolated myself, I cut myself from everybody. So I had no one to call up and say, "Hey, am I doing this right or wrong?" So parenting was tough because I don't have role models. In that respect, though, at the same time, because I isolated myself from my family, I taught my children to love each other, accept each other, and respect each other, and they are very close. Like if one, crisis happens with one child, we're in there like a swarm, and they're my family, and that's my legacy, and I'm very proud of that because they'll never walk out on each other, and same with disciplining. That too was very difficult. In my book, actually, there was a few incidences where I felt I was going to leave my children because I felt that I was following my mother's footsteps. Really? And to me, that was a really harsh thing because I swore I would never be my mother.
And how did you get past that? How did you work through that and make sure to keep your children with you and not become like your adoptive mother?
Well, initially, I know it's kind of weird. I recognized that I cut myself off emotionally. I almost was like a robot. I parented like a robot. Like, my emotion, my heart wasn't out. Like, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain it. But, eventually I had to make the choice, especially when I became a single mom. I had no choice. I was no longer just a mother. I was also a father. So, and it was very